I am delighted to be joined today by former Delegate Dan Cox from the Free State of Maryland, the Old Line State. So this is a huge honor for us on the Sovereignty Podcast, and you have not only served as a state delegate, but you were also at the most recent gubernatorial election. You were the candidate for the Republican Party, and you have a law practice where you've focused an awful lot on constitutional law issues. So it'll be really great today to have the opportunity to get into issues around how we can secure the integrity of our elections. And across the Western world at the moment, this is a huge issue. So maybe to kick us off, you could say a little bit about yourself, your background, what took you into politics.
Well, certainly, it's an honor, David, to be here with you and your guests. It's an honor always to speak with my Scottish friends. We cheer you on as we talked offline. I have a wee bit of Scottish blood in me as well, through my grandmother, and I'm very, very proud of that heritage. And we've enjoyed our trips to Scotland with my children. I have a background in really in ministry. My father's a minister, and in that context, we saw a great need where family rights were coming under attack nearly daily, and it seemed like that there was no clear strategy that existed in the existing leadership of the parties to defend the family, to make sure that our values were represented, and to ensure that we maintained the integrity of really the foundation of society, which is the family unit. In particular, my father launched he comes from a private school leadership background. So in that context, he also launched the first international home education program. And as someone who is a leader in homeschooling, this came to the forefront as well through issues involving the state and child protective services and educational issues. And so I felt a calling to law school. I did that, and a little crazy to do that later in life, but it was exciting. My wife cheered me on. She helped me. And then in the context of graduation and practicing law, it became evident that our leadership that was elected was departing in my view and concern, departing from the basic tenets of not only the Constitution, but of our moral fabric. And for instance, our pro-life party was poised to nominate for Congress an individual who was openly against talking about pro-life values, and even more so was for state funding of those issues. And so that became a concern because we're very pro-life as a family, and our party, the Republican Party here in the United States and in Maryland, is very, very pro-life. I come from a family of 10, and my wife and I have 10 children. So we're very grateful we're very grateful to the Lord for his blessings. And we see that as really when you, at the end of your life, what do you take with you? It's only your friends, right? And God willing, you'll see your friends in heaven and hopefully your children. None of the other things matter. So we looked at that and we said, we need to probably run for Congress because we need to have a pro-life voice. Well, I did, and I ended up winning. And I did 5 debates against the far left communist leader of the Democrat Party at that time, who you may know. I say communist sincerely. I think he would describe himself as a progressive socialist, but my views is that he also believes in state mandate. And that's Jamie Raskin. You probably heard of him. He's impeached President Trump 3 times. I tried to run him off his feet in a 3-1 blue district, very difficult, but we did very well, scared him into the realization that the people of Maryland care about these issues. I ended up developing somewhat of a little friendship with him as a professional friendship, as a courtesy. But other than that, he's extremely far left, and it awakened me to the ongoing need to have a voice in politics. And so that's when I was grateful to be elected as the first standing delegate for North Frederick County since Francis Scott Key's father John Roski was in that position, won that position. I was honored to be elected as a state delegate. And so in that capacity, I got more and more involved, obviously, with defending our freedoms. And then out of the blue, the COVID lockdowns were ordered, and my Governor Larry Hogan, happened to be president of the National Governors Association. And in that role, he used that as a shadow government position, so-called, to force President Trump to try to shut down the country and to try to shut down really the West. Very, very influential, connected to several billionaires, including some of the far left billionaires that wish to manipulate our elections. And I saw that the COVID issue was being used to steal the election. So I became a Trump lawyer. I worked in Philadelphia, and I saw with my own eyes and witnessed the steal. I describe it as watching, it seemed to me like I was watching a bleed out, and that we couldn't stop the bleed because they just kept trucking in these ballots in the middle of the night from nowhere. They were duplicates. I saw them. They clearly were not legitimate votes because they had basically appeared to be printouts for one vote only. And our ballots, by the way, for a presidential election will have sometimes 20 or 30 people to vote for. And they were trucking in ballots for Joe Biden with one vote. And all of these thousands and thousands of ballots looked like they were pre-printed, and there were no down ballot votes. And if you look at the Philadelphia election in 2020, you'll see there's about, I think it was the last I checked, 1 to 200,000 overvotes, meaning that Joe Biden somehow came up with the magical additional ballot votes to win Pennsylvania without any other person being voted for on those ballots, or very few others voted for. That's not legitimate, and it certainly spoke of serious long-term concerns, as we know. So that kind of continued to thrust me into politics. Ended up running for governor, was the standing governor nominee for my party. And because I had had it out with Governor Hogan for his misuse of COVID lockdowns and the mandates forcing us into our homes, I had sued him. And every time we filed a motion in court, he ended up opening up the state. And we beat him down to reopening our state about a year before he wanted to. And at the end of the day, that ended up coming back to haunt me in the governor race, because then he gathered his billionaire donors to make sure that Wes Moore won and that I lost. So we have a current governor, Wes Moore. So that's kind of the background of how I got into this. And honestly, David, I'm just an average guy. I'm a dad. I grew up on a farm here in Frederick, and I had the privilege and honor to go to university and law school and to fight for our freedoms. I saw this as a historical thing, all the way back to our Scottish ancestors really coming here to America. But also, when you look at the history of our documents, the reason we have a constitution is because we've seen the problems when you don't have one. And our constitution is the highest law of the land. So that means, as a lawyer, I get to walk into court and bind officials to those terms by law and to litigate that. And so we did that. But ultimately, it's an ongoing process that never ends. We have to continue to press forward. And so standing for elections is very, very influential. It's important, and it's a necessity, because one of the things that really the globalists and the elite like to do is to intimidate folks, whether it's through campaign finance threats or other threats, to basically be quiet. Well, running for office is the democratic way. This is how you speak firmly on truth in politics. And so that's what I've been doing. And I'm so glad to meet you and to see that you're doing similarly. You're working hard. And I think ultimately that's the work of the future, is to see our young people and we're seeing this, by the way, in America. We're seeing our young people come around. I mean, there was a lull, but the numbers of young people that voted for my friend, President Trump, far outpaced any Republican other candidate really in the history of the United States. So young people are beginning to awaken to the fact that their elected leaders are not always doing what they should be doing. So that's a short little background of how I got where I am. But because of that, here I am working. I love the administration. I'm not quite, I'm not in the administration yet, but I'm working closely with Pam Bondi and others on different matters for my clients, who have one of which was murdered by an illegal, her daughter was raped, strangled, and murdered by an illegal alien that was flown into our state of Maryland by President Biden illegally. And so we're dealing with these. It's very sad, but it's also encouraging to see a president who, and the people coming together to say enough is enough. We're going to have a new direction.
Can you say a little bit more about that case?
Certainly. So the global elites decided to flood the West with immigrants, and some of whom I love, and because they're wonderful people. I'm not saying that everybody's wrong, but we're talking about a huge number of military male and others that are not family focused, many of whom in our area of the world are connected to very dangerous drug gangs. And these gangs include Tren de Aragua and MS-13 and other gangs similar. And basically, Maryland has become a sanctuary state where Wes Moore and the Democrats have decided that citizenship is not so much of a concern anymore, and they want to have illegal aliens allowed to vote. I've been fighting this now for about 10 years. We have 6 cities in Maryland that allow illegal alien voting. They're presently not allowed in our federal elections, thank God, so they can't vote for president. But many do because they get away with it, because we don't have a proper legitimate process to protect the vote. And because of that, they're able to sneak through very easily and falsify ballots and such. And of course, the left will challenge that and say, oh, that's a lie. That's not true. But I've litigated this. I've seen it. We just recently noticed that there were, I think Judicial Watch noted that there were close to several 100,000 illegal individuals registered to vote. So in fact, one of their cases might have it in the millions just in this area, in the DC metro area. But anyway, that aside, this case happened because of a policy decision by world elites. The WEF and others decided to flood the borders because they wanted to flip the demographics, because they saw a trend to reestablish principles that we all believe in, that our families be strengthened and protected, that taxpayers actually get the services that they pay taxes for, and that our societies are orderly and have law and order being enforced. And that's not the modus operandi of the Democrats. They and the left wants to see a bit of chaos all the time so that they can be the rescuers and the saviors, and so that they can then fund those issues by the billions, so that they can then grift upon that funding through their NGOs. And they're all on the take with the NGOs. And so Elon Musk is exposing that, and President Trump's exposing that. And what we've done in our case is expose that by saying, look, enough is enough. We have determined in our case through information so far obtained that President Biden's illegal order to open up the borders also included flying these MS-13 gang-related people to Maryland. And here's the problem. We have, through Interpol and through other means, to verify the identities of people that come into any nation. We can do that very easily. And if, as in this case, the individual is undocumented, they can also be verified through what they proffer as their identity. And that happens at the border. So our border control can call Venezuela or call El Salvador or call whatever nation this person is coming from. And by the way, we're having people now coming from Muslim nations in Africa. I mean, it's just amazing what's happened. But President Trump has shut the border. So it went from about 200,000 a month, I think it was, to now maybe 20 a month are getting through. We're catching them all. But in any case, they could have checked. They were required by law to check. And Biden gave the order, apparently, at least potentially through Mayorkas, the current Homeland Secretary at the time, Homeland Security Secretary. And the end result was they refused, even though they knew he had MS-13 tattoos. They refused to place that call down to El Salvador and to check, to place the check with the embassies, to place the check with the government authorities, to see if this person had come up on the Interpol list or on some other list. They didn't want to know. It was like, see no evil, hear no evil. And so they covered their eyes. They put him on a plane and sent him. If they had checked, they would have known that he was wanted for serious violent crimes and as a suspected MS-13 member in El Salvador. They didn't do it. So this was all because they wanted to traffic all of these individuals in. This is also unfortunately, part of a massive international sex trafficking and human trafficking program that is unlawful and violates human rights and the norms and decencies of the liberties of all mankind. So this is what had been going on under Biden. And the reason that the Democrats were doing that is because they wanted to flip the vote of Texas. If they get Texas, they will perpetually win the White House. And they knew that they were close if they could just flood Texas with a lot of different new potential votes, that could do the difference. Now, thankfully, Texas was in the hands of a Republican governor. And thankfully, they fought very hard to enforce border laws and enforce election integrity laws. And so at the end of the day, Texas has stayed in the conservative column. And that has made all the difference with winning the White House again. So what happened was Biden then flew all these individuals. We're told 30,000 unaccompanied minors were trafficked into my state of Maryland. And one of them was this 17-year-old MS-13. And by the way, it turns out he had murdered 4 women and raped 3. Probably also was confessing to raping the 4 he murdered, in addition to my clients. So we're talking about a 5-time murderer. It's like a serial killer. And yet he was flown into Maryland by President Biden and put in a public school alongside other girls because they thought, oh, what a nice young man. He needs an education. Well, I'm sorry. If they had looked at his tattoos, they would have seen, if they had made the call, they would have seen and they would have determined that and known that he was a wanted man for violent crimes, and then subsequently confessed to a total of 5, murdering 5 women. This is not abnormal. This is one case in Maryland, and my friends also represent other women who you might have seen with the president recently. Rachel Moran was just in the White House this week. She's also from Maryland, and her daughter, a mother of 5, a beautiful young lady, 35-year-old lady of 5, was viciously dragged by a gang member. I believe it was MS-13. I'd have to check my facts on that one, but an illegal alien waited for her in the weeds, in the bush, along the trail that she was jogging on, and dragged her, smashing her head against a rock to cause her to stop fighting until she became semi-conscious, making a hole in her head about this big. And while she was bleeding profusely, dragged her to a drainage ditch pipe, threw her and slammed her body against the wall of the pipe. And the reason they know this is because the blood is outlined from her head all the way down her body. And then he proceeded to rape her. And he raped her until then later he threw her on the ground. And as she was dying, he took a stone and smashed her head until she died. And then, he smashed her head and she wasn't dead. So then he strangled her until she died. Now, I hate to describe the brutality of this. It's not something that I normally do, except in court. I despise it. I don't even want my children hearing this. But I want people to understand who are the voters, to understand what's coming to them. This is here in Maryland. And even with President Trump, it's very hard to weed it all out because they disappear into society. And until they do something wrong, it's hard to catch them and identify them. Because otherwise, what are you going to do? You're going to start stopping everybody on the street and say, papers, please, papers, please. I mean, that's not what we do in America. So it's very difficult in a free society to remove the dangerous criminals once they're embedded in. And so I just give that as a warning because that's just the second case I've mentioned, but there are many, many more, unfortunately.
So one of the things that you've alluded to in both of your answers on several occasions is the role of the billionaire class. the role of big money. And I guess it seems as though it's acting at the moment. I mean, we saw the numbers for how much Kamala Harris was able to raise in 3 months. My understanding is over the course of her campaign, it was over $1 billion. And that was just her official campaign, not really saying anything about the PACs and so on. I mean, these numbers are coming from another planet, as far as I can see. What role is money playing these days in not just in U.S. presidential elections, which we have some idea of, but is it also playing a significant role, in your opinion, at state level and even lower down?
Unfortunately, it is playing a very serious role in state level and even county level politics. For instance, in Maryland, we have what's called state prosecutors that are actually elected by county. And the reason they're called state prosecutors is because the state pays for some of their salary, but they are county elected prosecutors. These are the highest prosecutors of the state, other than the attorney general, who doesn't deal with standard prosecutions. So if you want to have a good prosecutor protect you, you need to have one that is willing to prosecute violent crime, willing to prosecute illegalities, such as any kind of element of society that will lead to disorder, such as what we have with the illegal alien population, defecating in the streets, things of this nature that are just shocking to the American culture. We need prosecutors that will, with blind justice, uphold the laws. And unfortunately, we're seeing Soros and his funding coming into our counties and states to elect prosecutors that are antithetical to society, that are not prosecuting crimes, and that are instead focusing on prosecuting good business people and your everyday taxpayer and citizen who's trying to do what's right, going after the family structure, using CPS to weaponize against families who wish to train their children according to the dictates of their conscience. And we see that in a context also with the environmental regulations. We had a big case here in Maryland where, and thankfully we won, but the Attorney General's office brought in a Soros-funded DEI initiative from the New York Law School, where they had 3 or 4 special prosecutors paid for by Soros, brought in to prosecute businesses under so-called environmental regulation issues, which none of which was realistic or true. In other words, we don't have a problem with businesses being polluters or anything. We have a great business climate. We are one of the cleanest states in the nation. We're one of the cleanest states in the world. I mean, if you traveled to China or to some of the places that don't have the kind of environmental regulations we have, you would probably be shocked comparing that to Maryland. And I think that's probably the case in much of the West. We have pretty good standards. But instead, they were shutting down companies that were just trying to make a living. And we were able to beat that and send them packing. I just won a case. Now, we have what's called a Second Amendment. So the average citizen in America can own firearms as they decide and not as the government decides. And the only thing that would prevent that is if they're a violent felon or if they're a convicted felon, then they can't own a firearm. But in this state of Maryland, even though we have a very liberal state, we have a lot of Democrats that love their firearms. I would say, I think the last poll I saw had about 48% of Democrat liberals in Maryland own firearms.
Vice President Harris was interviewed and spoke about her Glock, and so yeah.
And they do that because they know they can't get elected if they speak against firearms here in America, because the average citizen really appreciates our freedom. It goes back to the founding, but it also has to do with family traditions and hunting and in this day and age, David, it has to do with women. The number of women getting armed in Maryland is outpacing men. The last I checked was 2 to 1, and my daughter is a firearms instructor, and all she does is host women's firearm classes so that they can own a firearm, own a pistol or whatever, and have what's called a CCW, a concealed carry permit. And that was under attack. So a recent case I had 2 different cases trying to shut down firearms dealers here in Maryland that are legitimate, what's called an FFL class 3, which is the highest class, is the one client I had, and then an FFL in Rockville, Maryland. And the government, the liberal far left government, went after them to close them down with false allegations of what's called straw purchases. Now, in Maryland and in the United States, you're only allowed to sell a firearm to the actual legitimate individual who has a right to own a firearm. You cannot knowingly sell a firearm to an individual who is buying it for somebody else. If you do that, it's called a straw purchase, and that is illegal. And not only will you lose your license, but you also go to jail. So we don't allow that. And my client is a police officer, and he does not allow that. But the government went after him, saying that he had let an African-American man purchase 5 pistols, and that appeared to be a straw purchase. Well, it turns out the man was licensed as a dealer, and that he had affirmed under oath that these were purchases for him and his dealership. In other words, his collector's license, which meant he affirmed under penalty of perjury that he was buying them for himself, not for another. And the state of Maryland, the state police, signed off on it. That's another thing we have, is the state police double checks every sale, and they sign off. And so the state of Maryland signed off. Well, long story short, they tried to come after my police officer client, saying that he should have known that this guy was a little shady and how he was operating his own collector's license. And we asked the court to please ask the individual how it is that my client should have known that he was shady. Apparently, one of the firearms ended up at a I think it was a crime scene where somebody got in a fist fight. No firearm was discharged, but apparently got in a fist fight in Washington, D.C. So that's how they traced it to my client. And they said, because the gun you sold ended up in a fist fight in D.C., then you should have known that the guy who bought it from you might have sold it to somebody that was nefarious. Well, so we asked the court, Your Honor, could we please understand how we should have known this? And I said it certainly couldn't be because the gentleman was African American, because that's a protected status under Maryland law. And how, I would not assume that counsel would ever, for once, impugn my client, who also has a African American family member, would impugn my client for doing for not profiling their race. Well, of course, the state began to fumble around. Oh, no, it wasn't because of race. So the judge said, well, then what was it for? And they said, well, because he was overweight. And the judge then took over. At that point, the judge took over and said, how dare you? So are you going to start weighing people on the scales before they exercise their rights? I mean, really? What is this? We won the case. The state bumbled it. But here's the reason I tell you the story, David. I don't mean to belabor it, but the reason I mention this is because why were we in court in the first place? It wasn't because of the state of Maryland. The state of Maryland did not have the funding to go after it. At least they hadn't allocated the funding, at least not much. You know who paid for it? We found out that every town paid for it. Every town then came into court with the state and informed the court that they were now working with the state office to prosecute my client as part of the state. Now, Everytown Law is funded by Soros and Bloomberg, 2 billionaires that their goal is to eradicate all Second Amendment gun rights in America. So we got the genie out of the bottle at that point, and we were able to demonstrate bad faith. We don't know we haven't announced what we might do at this point after we've won. The state is trying to cover its backsides by appealing, but it's a very good ruling. The judge was basically said, don't ever come in my courtroom for politics again. He basically politely said it that way. He said, you know, if you want to change the law, you know, my client followed the law to the T. If you don't like the law, then go to politics and change the law, but don't come in my courtroom. So, and I'm summarizing what he said, but in any case, it was a great victory. But I tell you that, David, because you know, these individuals through the WEF have a global plan to eliminate the ability for people, everyday tax-paying citizens, to ever oppose their oligarchical decisions. And I don't say that lightly. I've seen it in practice as a state delegate. When we were preparing for elections, I was submitting an election integrity bill. And, you know, one of the Democrat chairwomen received a bill proposed from on the election integrity issue that had to do with COVID, because how you count votes during times when you're locked down it mattered. So a COVID regulation then was sent to us, to the chairwoman of the committee I was in front of in Annapolis, with a bill written and proposed in Brussels.
Mm.
So we're talking about globalist leaders through the World Health Organization issuing legislation to the state of Maryland. And when I discovered that, of course, I gave my speech, and the bill was killed because you know, we love our freedom here. We're not going to take any dictates from Brussels. So anyway,
but
it's a danger.
Neither you
it's
should.
A danger.
Neither you should. It's a battle we're fighting as well here, very much in Scotland. It's interesting, you know, just glancing through the recent documents that have been released by Tulsi Gabbard, new director of national intelligence, about the efforts it seems to suppress, following 2020, any conversation at all about what actually went on. And one of the lines that really struck me from that document was that one of the goals of government was that Americans have been increasing faith in democracy and government. Now, it would seem there's two ways of approaching that, right? Either you propagandize the population so that they, you know, democracy good, anyone that criticizes democratic process is bad, or you actually make sure that you've got sound democratic governance in your country. And that, to me, would surely mean that you have to allow criticism of processes. You have to allow fraud to be called out. So where do you think things have moved on a bit since 2020, when there was so much suppression of speech around about what was happening? It was just impossible to, you know, criticize what was going on. And also, you know, when we look back to that result, you know, it doesn't make Kamala Harris look very good. She only got 69 million votes versus Joe Biden's 81 million, you know. So do you think that conversation, you know, do you think things are opening up and there's more opportunity perhaps now to raise election integrity issues? So I'll leave that one with you. One also a question I have for you, and this is a huge one for us here in Scotland as well, where we have proxy voting, is around about mail-in ballots. How do you ensure that mail-in ballots are kept secure? I mean, how do you ensure that is a system that we can trust? It seems to me really, really difficult.
Very much so. And I would, starting with your second question first, I'd say the only way to is to ban them. Mail-in ballots were the invention of the globalists to steal the vote. And I say that with every carefulness possible and with proof behind it. And here's how it is. We have now shown, if you watch the documentary 2000 Mules, how through mail-in ballots and drop-off ballots, an individual NGO can run an operation in a city like Philadelphia and collect ballots, illegal ballots, and have these mules that then bring them and drop them off. And they must, once they're deposited, they must be counted. However, there's zero proof and vetting of who these individuals are, even when they have to attest. Now, a lot of my Democratic colleagues will say, well, hold on a minute. all mail-in ballots require attestation. You have to swear that you are the voter, and you have to demonstrate that through at least one, if not two signatures in America. Well, what's a signature? Anybody can, I mean, this is how fraud, if signatures were the proof of perfection, we would never have a fraud claim in court. The whole idea of fraud is a fraudulent signature. That tends to be part of the substance of a fraud claim. Not always, but it tends to be part of the substance of any fraud claim is misrepresentation of the truth. And so here you have now no clarity in the election system. The electoral process then is now wide open to foreign actors. It's wide open to nefarious entities, and it's happening. And I'll give you an example here from America quickly. Colorado used to be a conservative red voting state here in America. The state of Colorado, if you travel there like I have, and I have family there, is extremely conservative. They have, red-blooded cowboys, and they have great businesses, one of the fastest growing business states. It has been. They're great people. They're great universities. It's very conservative, except for one area called Boulder, Colorado, which is not so conservative. So one little area then organized and changed the vote process to be like California. And they changed it from the normal procedural where you show up to vote and you show, proof of who you are because you present yourself to vote, to 100% mail-in. And so in Colorado, they went with, as soon as they became 100% mail-in ballot voting, they went and flipped and they went blue under Obama, and they've never been red since. It's just fraught with fraud. And the same thing we saw in California, the same thing we saw in the state of Oregon and in the state of Washington. All of these states along the coast, the Gold Coast of America, tend to have huge conservative populations, except for pockets in the cities. And they changed the balloting process, so now there's very little verification ability, and they can then flood the ballots. And Democrats will say that's false. You're making a false claim that all these elections are not legitimate. Well, I'm sorry, it's the truth, and it's coming out. It's coming out very quickly. As you saw, there was a what's in America called a CISA group, which has it's a federal agency that had a backdoor key to all voting machines, electronic voting machines, including in the state of Maryland when I was standing for governor. And what they can do is access through the internet those voting machines. And interesting things happen without being able to prove who or what is happening. Foreign actors and or CIA or other actors, nefarious actors that may or may not exist on the books, that are maybe off books actors, can access backdoor an electronic voting machine that's on the internet, either ELS or one of these other machines potentially. I'm not going to say what voting machine. I don't know what voting machines. I don't want them.
So what's the standard? What's the standard you would like to get back to? I mean, this is a conversation we need to have, Colin, as well.
So
you spoke about mail-in ballots being outlawed, and presumably you would like to see a greater degree of verifiability, voter ID laws. Or are we going to be a bit more radical and say, open ballots? So where do you stand on terms of the standard for election integrity? Because I'm sure this is something that will be picked up by parties across Europe. Many of us are, fighting the same battles, and it would be really interesting to hear from you what you think the gold standard for election integrity is.
I think we need to have paper ballots, in-person voting, same day counting, IDs. You have to look. We have IDs for everything. I can't, come to Scotland or to England or whatever without presenting my passport, etc. And I can't go to a, pick up a beer or something at the local store without presenting my ID to show that I'm able to purchase something like that. I mean, this is standard practice. And yet when it comes to voting, all of a sudden, oh, no, you can't check to see who the person is. That's outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous. So that's changing. President Trump is issuing executive orders about that. and we are working hard behind the scenes to make that happen here in Maryland. I did pass a bill in Maryland to require auditing of the ballot, of the vote, before a certification of a so-called winner occurs, because what was happening is you would have allegations of irregularities occur, and under state law, then there can be an audit and a potential recount. And someone standing for an election can then have power. They're the ones that they're the individual that has the ability. No one else can ask for this. The individual standing for election has standing, meaning they have authority in the court to demand that the audit happens and that the recount happens. However, the state of Maryland was going ahead and certifying the winner while that was all taking place, and it would be months and years of litigation. And so in the meantime, you have this situation where a potential winner is sitting on the sidelines while the loser is actually certified the candidate and is serving in office. And that has happened. There was a Democrat that was unelected after being elected for fraud in the city of Frederick, Maryland, my hometown, at the same time that I was standing for governor. When Democrats were telling me not to talk about voter fraud because it didn't exist, they ended up suing to stop their own candidate because there was a battle between an upcoming candidate and the chief Democrat of the city. And the chief Democrat lost. And so they investigated, they audited, and they claimed that there was 1 or 2 votes that were fraudulent because that was how tight the race was. In any case, I tell you that to say that the answer is we have to get back to reality of verification process. And it cannot be manipulated. There must be, if there is going to be any electronic involvement, which I don't agree with anymore. Yeah. But if there will be, because we're in we're in the electronic age, they say. So why are we doing paper? Well, we need to do paper because you can verify one vote, one person, an identity, and the watermark on the ballot, and also the barcode. But at the end of the day, if anyone is going to use an electronic voting machine, there has to be disclosure of the fact that this is secure through blockchain technology. Why is it that our banking systems can protect our dollars or our pounds? Over in UK, we have a very strict banking system with blockchain technology electronically, such that if fraud occurs, you can immediately identify, and the bank can deal with it, and the individual can deal with it, and you can track the person down on cameras because you know where the point of sale occurred, and you can pick them up and they go to jail. Why can't we do that with voting? I mean, of course, the vote is even more important. I would say my vote is more important than my bank account, because I don't have a bank account if the bad guy gets in there and steals it, which is called taxation without representation. But in any case, at the end of the day, I think that we need to get back to the paper ballots, and that's what we're moving towards, I hope, in America. I think we've seen it in other Western nations, and it seems to be doing a lot better of a job. And then organizing the vote, that's a whole nother issue, but organizing and getting out the vote is crucial for people like you to win, and for us to have the voices of the people heard. But to your point about those voices being heard, yes, there is a change. We have, because of Elon Musk with President Trump teaming up, it has changed 2 other leading figures in speech, Jeff Bezos and the Facebook guy. I can't remember his name all of a sudden, but I'm drawing a blank. But yes, thank you. So here's the thing. All of a sudden, during the elections, when I won, Facebook blackmailed me. I mean, they just totally took me offline. I had 15,000 followers overnight. It was growing, probably would have been 100,000 soon after that. And they just delisted me. My Facebook account went away. Well, I won anyway, but that doesn't always happen, because social media is the voice of the people right now. It's how you connect to voters. It's a very powerful medium, and we can also, use technologies to encircle voters and to follow them around on Facebook, so that my ads will pop up whenever they're on Facebook. So it's a very powerful tool, and not just Facebook, but Instagram and X and all of that. You can target your voters when you mesh the voter data with the the technology. And so to be blocked means that you're being denied the right to speak to a voter. And it happened to me. Twitter also did the same to me. I was delisted by them. So what I did was I sent demand letters. I didn't file lawsuits at the time because I didn't have the time. I was running for office and I wanted to win. So I just ran them off their feet. I won the election, filed letters, and we did do some legislation in Maryland that put some limits on that kind of behavior. Even the Democrats agreed it was dangerous. And, long term for any party, it's kind of dangerous for a few people that are oligarchs to control the mouthpieces. And so at the end of the day, though, I think we're seeing a big change. President Trump is leading the way with free speech in America, and it is opening wide the opportunities to get the voices out. And the way you have to fight this, I think, is you have to be vigilant and you have to challenge. Every time they silence you, you go back double against them and you fight them and you get them by the jugular, because they're the ones that are violating the law. They're the ones that are violating human rights and freedom. And therefore, they are very possibly committing nefarious behavior they don't want talked about. It's not the other way around. It's not the other way around. And I'll tell you, I just got a case Friday where a business was delisted from a bank here in Maryland because of what they were selling. So we're going after them.
Yeah. To Europe's shame, JD Vance is leading on free speech in Europe. So there we go.
Fantastic. He's
yes.
fantastic. We love him. You know what? Interesting.
Yeah, sorry, and you go. Yes.
Interesting anecdote.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
I believe so. JD's a wonderful person. I believe I've had the privilege of meeting him. One of the most down-to-earth vice presidents that has ever been in the White House there. He is fantastic, and his family, as you saw him probably this weekend, he was carrying his son to the Easter celebrations, and just a wonderful person. So anyway.
So just before we close quickly, for anyone that is interested in this topic of election integrity, that maybe wants to connect with you to follow your work or to perhaps follow any other projects that you're involved in, any links to anything that you mentioned, we will include in the description below the video. But is there any thing that you would like to plug or flag up or raise people's awareness of just before we close off the conversation today?
Well, thank you, David. I would say get involved with sovereignty, get involved with David McCutcheon, get involved with people who are speaking up like you. And I mean that sincerely, because when I was elected to the State House, to delegate, it was really a God thing. It was an amazing movement that happened. We went from somebody in my seat before me who had been a great person, but had not been a really an outspoken leader on some of these issues, to basically almost 180-degree turnaround where I was able to put pro-family legislation in, pro-education, pro-life. I was one of the leading pro-life state legislators in Maryland. I put in, I think, about 15 bills. And we did a work for freedom that began a groundwork and a movement. And once people understand that there's hope, they begin to join in, and it became a movement. And when we ran for governor and stood for governor, we had a movement like none other, and it's still existing. We took over for the first time, even though I didn't win the governorship. Let me tell you, David, why it was all worth it to me. Of the 24 counties, I won about 18 or 19, but of those counties, we have what's called independent elected boards over the schools. So guess what? 22 of those counties had my parents that were on my team, our movement. Many of them got elected to those school boards, and now they're helping to shape the hearts and minds of the children in the curriculum, for the next 4 to 8 years, depending on their term. So it's worth it, and you can connect with me. It's an honor, David, to be part of your show. You can connect with me on Twitter at Dan Cox ESQ. Dan Cox ESQ is probably the fastest way. I accept private messaging on that. That's how you got in touch with me, which I appreciated you reaching out. You can also send me an email at dcox@coxlawcenter.com. excuse me, I have a few websites that are active, but there's still some things that we're producing. We're going to hopefully launch a new program here with my law firm called it's going to be a not-for-profit law firm approach for an advocacy group called the Magna Carta Law Foundation that we're launching.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm working on that because we hold the Magna Carta very dearly here in Maryland. As you can see, my Maryland colors behind me here from Lord Baltimore and Lady Crossland. And the history of the Magna Carta is actually enshrined in the Maryland Constitution. Under Article 5, we uphold those Bill of Rights issues as law here in Maryland, which would include the right to jury and so many other precious rights that we have. So I think advancing those due process rights is what I'm working on right now. And I'm also, because I'm heavily involved with cases that are working with President Trump's administration on resolution, that I'm focused on some of these policy issues right now as well.